Okay, beautiful. So, hello everyone, and hello to those present. Before we begin tonight's information session about the election, I would like to acknowledge that the land that I meet with you on tonight is the land of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and I pay my respect to elders past and present. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and I would also like to extend this acknowledgement to Aboriginal people from across the continent, as of course this is a recorded session and you may be viewing this from anywhere. So, thank you. Obviously tonight we are going to be talking a little bit about the role of USASA board member, as we have a couple of vacancies on the USASA board. This is what we're going to go through tonight. We're going to cover just a brief of what USASA is. Hopefully, you know, you're a little bit familiar with what USASA is, and that's why you've chosen to, you know, get involved in this and try and find out a bit more information. But of course, as I've been told many times from our current reps, that they had no idea what was involved. It was a real scratching of the surface to find out all the amount of stuff that we actually do. So that will be good. I'll also go into a little bit about what the board reps themselves actually do on the board, and what the expectations are. I'll also, in this, kind of explain a little bit of what USASA's governance structure is and why it is that we have elections and the way that we run things. And in the context of that, how the election process will then work from here on then. And then at the end, of course, there'll be time for questions. If you do have any questions, feel free to chime in at the time that you have them. I've got my full screen open here with the presentation on it, so I can't actually see anything in the chat. So maybe either use the chat or the hands up function if you did want to do that, or just unmute yourself at a time when I've paused. So yeah, this is what we're going to cover today. So I'll start, of course, with what USASA is. So we are the University of South Australian Student Association. Our mission is to empower students to shape their own university journey. And our vision from this is students that are empowered and have the capacity and skills for living and leading. So this description and this mission and vision have come from USASA's strategic plan. This strategic plan was written in 2018 and is adapted to go from 2018 to 2021. So it's actually a very exciting time to be a part of the board and be involved in this process, because we will be doing an in-depth strategic planning process throughout the year and really setting that agenda and what our goals are for the next 3 years or so. So it's a very exciting time to be on the board. I may have mentioned that we're a fee-for-service organisation. So essentially what that means is that we provide services to UniSA students on both behalf of the university and on behalf of our own organisation. So USASA is an incorporated association. This means that it is its own legal entity, and it does, you know, have the right to hold its own property and so on. But it's a non-for-profit, so we're not a company. We're essentially a charity. We're an incorporated association with a charity licence as well. The purpose of an incorporated association like this, and particularly of a non-for-profit, is to represent the interests of its members. And members of USASA are UniSA students. That is who our membership is. Although there are a few bits in the Constitution that do allow for us to have members, I guess, you know, certain types of members that may not be students, that's typically not the case. And all UniSA students are members, and all of our members are UniSA students. So another feature of this is that we do have directly elected board representatives from that student base. So students elect the board are students, and they come from the cohort in which votes for them. And yeah, as you can see here, this is a few of our services that we do provide. Hopefully some of these are familiar with to you. The advocacy service, financial counselling, student voice. This is a new one that we're starting off from this year, which will be to promote student representation and different opportunities for non-board members, I suppose, to get involved in that space. Verse Magazine, Clubs and Societies, Student Reps, which is the board, which is potentially you, and also USASA social events and the student spaces. So we do have physical spaces on each campus, but we do operate a lot of these things are available both online and on campus. Yeah, that's in a nutshell, I suppose, what USASA does and what the student-facing side of things are. We do have a team of, I think we're up to 16 or 17 full-time staff now who tend to carry out these services. So this is essentially how USASA operates. So you can see here that there's the Chief Executive Officer with an arrow pointing to staff. So the CEO directs the staff provide the services, But you can see here, this arrow, that it's actually the board who directs the CEO. And as I go into a little bit more about what the role of boards are and what board reps do, this will hopefully make a bit more sense. But yeah, essentially this is the structure of USASA. So the student board directs the chief executive officer, who directs the staff, who provide the services, but also support the board as well. That one of the services that we provide is, of course, executive support to the board. And that's partly my role. So my role is the coordinator of governance and student leadership. And in fact, I've just realised that I haven't introduced myself at all, which is a complete oversight. So forgive me for that. But my name is Bridget. I am the coordinator of governance and student leadership, and I work directly with the board and to promote these, student representation goals and executive support for the board as well. The board is also supported by a legal advisor and a finance advisor. And the reason for that is that, it is actually quite a serious position being on the board. You are discharged with the duties of being essentially the management of the organisation. But of course, we also realise that, your students, you may not already have work experience in this area, and we wouldn't necessarily expect that you do. So we see this as being an educated experience, but we also want to make sure that you have the tools and the resources to be able to do your jobs well, and to do them, within the law and within the, what's required of board directors. So we do have that support as part of the board as well. So this is essentially what boards do. So your primary duty as a board member will be to act in the best interest of the organisation and its members, which, as I've mentioned, are students. This essentially means that you are a steward of the organisation's assets. You make sure that we're spending money correctly on the right things, on the things that we've said that we'll spend it on, and also making sure that the services that we're running are aligned to our overall corporate objectives as well. Good governance is next on here. Good governance is actually a governance term. It essentially means there's many different things that are examples of good governance, but it's basically making sure that you have the right systems in place and the right processes to make sure that you are able to, discharge your duties effectively as board members. And, once you're elected onto the board, you will receive more direct training on this. We do go through a lot of what this stuff is. We want to make sure that you're well equipped. So if some of this is seeming like foreign concept now, don't worry, you will definitely get more in-depth training on this before you do commence your role. Another duty of the board is compliance, and that means both legal compliance and financial compliance. It itself is an example of good governance, and it does, play into that whole check and balance between you direct the CEO directs staff, and then you hear reports back from the CEO and vice versa. The board is also in charge of maintaining the sense of purpose and direction. And so I've already mentioned that strategic planning process. And in fact, that is one of the main duties. And it is exciting to be on the board in the year where a new strategic plan is being run, because obviously you get to be in charge of setting that direction and setting that purpose. You have some real influence over the direction of USASA in the future. Whereas I suppose in those non-drafting years, it's more about ensuring that we're complying with it and that, we are able to following up on things rather than necessarily coming up with those ideas from the beginning. So, oops, sorry, my apologies. I touched the mouse and it did that. But yeah, the final thing that I've got on here as well is overseeing CEO performance. That again ties in with good governance and compliance and a few of the things that I've mentioned before. But in practice, what this really means is in board meetings, which happen every month, you will hear a report from the CEO that you're able to ask questions to and, provide advice and provide direction and that kind of thing. It's often said that the board has one employee and that employee is the CEO, and then the CEO is responsible for all the other employees. And that's true. So it's not necessarily the board's duty to direct individual staff members. In fact, it's definitely not their role. That's the CEO's role. But you've got to make sure that your CEO is doing what you've asked them to do and is doing that. You just don't micromanage on that level down to the other staff. So the board is made up of 15 student representatives. These ones here that I've highlighted in orange, they are the vacant positions on the board. Only one of those McGill rep positions is actually vacant, but I wasn't going to get rid of the two because we do have 2 representatives from each of those metropolitan campuses, 1 representative from the non-metropolitan campuses, which is Whyalla, Mount Gambier and UniSA Online, which we do consider to be a campus as well of the university. The other members, of course, are the president, postgrad rep, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander student rep and international student rep. So they aren't necessarily tied to a specific campus. And in fact, when it's a big full election that we have every September, October, any student can vote for those positions, but only students from the campus can vote for those campus rep positions. So I'll go into this a bit more later, but basically, if you're running for McGill rep, only McGill's home campus students are going to be able to vote, and same for Whyalla and Mount Gambier. So there'll be a different electorate for each group, essentially. You can see as well over here on the right-hand side that we've got these, what I've described as ex officio and non-voting members of the board, and that's the CEO, the finance advisor, and the legal advisor. So what that means is that they are members of the board for purposes of, you know, reporting to the government with all our requirements about being an incorporated association and so on, and for our auditors and that kind of thing. But the way that our constitution is set up is that they're not elected. They are appointed into those roles, and they don't necessarily have voting. They don't have voting rights in board decisions. So the decisions are made by the board members who are elected, which are all students. So that's basically the background on the structure and the stuff underpinning the board and USASA. So now I guess I'll go into a little bit about what board members actually do, what their responsibilities are and their expectations. So, you know, this top one, consulting with students to understand what they want, that is, I would consider something to be a secondary responsibility of the board. In fact, it was probably bad communication design for me to put that at the top of the power slide, but, you know, what are you going to do? Essentially, we'll start with number 2. So chairing or participate in USASA committees and board meetings. The board meetings are probably the most important thing for board members to attend. They do actually occur once a month, and there are quite strict attendance requirements on those, which I actually do have a slide on a bit later that I'll discuss then. But, you know, attending those board meetings and making decisions is really the crux of what this role is from the ground up. That's the bare minimum expectation, I suppose. And then this extra stuff is, you know, what you might expect to do day to day or throughout the month or outside of those board meetings. So consulting with students to understand what they want, looping back to that. Essentially, you know, if you're making decisions on behalf of students and you yourself aren't quite sure what, you know, the students that you represent want on this issue, it's definitely within your wheelhouse and within your, you know, within your capabilities and responsibilities to go out and consult with students to find out what they do want. So, for example, I had a meeting with one of the reps last week. They wanted to find out some more information. They'd been receiving emails from a couple of students about an issue to do with their studies. They want to find out whether or not that's actually a more widespread systemic issue or just something that seems to only be impacting the students who happen to contact them. So now they're doing a bit more consultation and a wider survey and an investigation into those issues. So that's, you know, that's one example of what you might do day to day if you did want to go beyond just those decision-making duties and I guess to enrich your decision-making. You can also chair and participate in USASA committees. So USASA has currently 5 subcommittees that report to the board, and they're basically advisory groups on certain issues. And you can see there I've listed finance, clubs and governance, for example. They do also have a diversity, equity and access committee, which looks at access and inclusion issues around the university. And then there's also a education committee as well, which is, you know, a good way to link up between different students from different academic units and different areas across the uni to discuss education issues. Those committees are chaired and run by board members, and the members of those committees are primarily board members. So, you know, having that, you know, gaining that experience in running committees or being part of committees is something that you'll get the opportunity to do. All board members are also required to submit a monthly activity report, and that's just part of, you know, your own reporting duties as a board member. And if you've ever been on the USASA website and seen the student board page, there's actually a link to all their reports that they do submit, because we also publish them as a blog on WordPress. So you can go in and check out what all the board reps have been up to and what they've been doing. I think there's actually blog posts all the way back to 2016 on that site. So we've been using that for quite a while, but it also means that you've got quite a lot of data and stuff to go back on there if you were curious to see what has been done and how things have been going for the reps. Another thing on here is attending meetings of USASA or the uni as required. So from time to time, the university will get in touch with us and say that they need a student representative on a particular committee or a particular working group around the university, and would a USASA board member be interested? So this is some examples of some of the things that some of the committees that board reps do sit on. So formal inquiries, which is, a decision-making committee into the outcomes for students that have been accused of academic misconduct or plagiarism or that kind of thing. Academic board, which is a senior committee of the university council. The academic board is a very senior committee in the university. In fact, it's the committee that, decides what degrees the university is going to run, for example. So USASA does have 5 board reps that do sit on that academic board. So that's the thing as well. And that's what I mean by if elected. So some of these, there are limited positions and the board does choose to, do a vote of its members, but there are always opportunities that do come up throughout the year as well, even if you're coming on a bit late. Sometimes working groups as well. So, for example, we've had board members take part in working groups and steering groups for when the university was constructing the sexual assault and sexual harassment policy. So, obviously something that you'd want to have a student voice on if there are decisions being made about, what should the process be if a student needs to report an unfortunate incident such as those I've mentioned. You want to have that student voice in that committee to make sure that, student voice is being heard and that decisions are being made with students in mind. And also sometimes hiring panels. That's another really cool opportunity that sometimes board reps get to do because it's, particularly for people who may be at the beginning of their careers or developing this kind of professional practice, being able to see a hiring panel from the other side is invaluable experience. So they're just a few examples of, the very wide range of things that board reps can do on top of their, decision-making duties, and how, we do interact with the university and do work in collaboration with the university quite often. At the bottom here, I've also got may organise activities for students. So again, this isn't necessarily something that's completely required of board reps because obviously you are students first and we do understand this. But having an activity on campus, like running a barbecue where you get to, then go out and talk to students and hear about what they want and that kind of thing is also something that can be quite valuable and also quite fun. Like if that's a way that you wanted to spend your time on campus, then that's perfectly, that's great as well. I have put a separate slide here for the president position. And even though that position isn't, vacant for this election, I still think it's kind of worth pointing out because the president does have a quite more substantial list of duties and responsibilities than the everyday board member might. And that is because, as the president of, an incorporated association and is the leader of this, they actually do have quite a lot of those extra duties. So they might be the media contact for USASA, like if we get contacted by the advertiser or something, they're the person who has to have their opinion and speaks up. They're also in charge of running the board meetings as well, and also overseeing that board member performance. So that doesn't necessarily mean that their role is to make sure that you are doing everything that you said you do week to week or anything like that. It's more that they're there to provide that leadership, I suppose, set that standard for how and set that culture for how they would like the board to run and how all the board members work and collaborate with each other. They also have a lot of committees within the university that in, say, the terms of reference for that committee or, the document that lays out what the purpose of that committee is, that membership will include specifically the president. And an example of that is the University Council, which is the most senior governing committee of the university. They usually sit on the academic board as well, which I've mentioned previously. They are also the student member of the Student Appeals Committee panel, which I mentioned just before formal inquiries. So basically any decision-making thing affecting a student that the university undertakes, there's usually open to appeals, all of these things. Many processes that students can go through to escalate any complaints or anything like that. And then the very final place where these kind of decisions can be appealed or upheld is the Student Appeals Committee. And so, yeah, I just think it's nice to mention that we do have a student representative on that committee as well, and that it is always the president. I do have, there's so many more that they do, but it's just worth mentioning because obviously you'll notice once you come on board and you meet who the president is that they do quite a lot of a different role, but again, they're your equal on the board in that sense that you're all part of the same team and working towards the same goals. So yeah, in summary, it's a decision-making role. That's what boards are. You don't necessarily go out and do the specific work, for example, like those services that I mentioned on the first page, like financial counselling and so on. Obviously, no board member is going to be a financial counsellor. Like, you guys are all students. But what your job in this whole thing is to do is to make the decision that, does USASA run a financial counselling service? Should USASA run a financial counselling service? That's a board decision. The idea to even have that service as part of what we do did originally come from a USASA committee. So it's an example of, directing from the big picture kind of stuff rather than that smaller hands on the ground kind of thing. That said, we love having board reps involved in events or in that kind of planning and stuff if it's something that they specifically want to be involved in. We always want to give any opportunity, I suppose, to give any experience to the reps that they want that will, help them in their role and help them in their career and stuff overall. So we're very open to having students involved in that smaller level. It's just not an expectation of your role. Yeah, so here we go, back to the good governance thing. Essentially, as a decision maker, this is what you need to ask yourself when you make every board decision is this in the best interest of USASA, and does it further USASA's objectives? And that's it. That's the crux of your role. That's what you're here to do. So I guess, for expectations, you want to know what the time commitment is. This is approximately what the official time commitment is. We say about 5 hours a week, or 10 hours a fortnight, or 20 hours a month. And the reason that I say it like that is because some weeks you're going to be really busy and some weeks you're not going to be as busy at all. So here are some examples of some of the ways that 5 hours a week might be spent. So board meetings, that's once a month. Committee meetings, depending on how many committees that you decide to be a part of, or if you chair a committee or take on a leadership role within that committee, that might be a bit of extra time in that week. If you do a formal inquiry panel, that might be a bit of extra time in 1 week. But you may not necessarily do all of these things in the same week. So I guess how you manage that 5 hours a week will be up to you and alongside your studies. And it will probably be something that you'll work out with the president and the expectations on that. But yeah, there is flexibility, but that is the basic expectation, I suppose, there. You can see on that bottom there, I've got this quote, you get out of this role what you put in it, and that's so true. While we say that the official minimum standard or minimum expectation of being a board is attending board meetings and making decisions within board meetings, you will probably be doing yourself a disservice to not take advantage of the rest of the opportunities that are there for you. So this position you will be on the board until the end of this year. So USASA board positions run on a calendar year term. So the current board started their term on the 1st of January, and if you're elected, you will be on the board with them until 31st of December. As you can see on this top point here where I said the election process ends no sooner than the 19th of April unless nominations are uncontested. Now, this is technically and purposefully vague governance language that I've used here, because basically when nominations close, if we have received more than one nomination for a particular position, then that position will go to an election and they'll be voting on that, for the candidates for that position. If only one nomination is received for that position, well, then that person is considered elected uncontested. If no nominations are received for that position, the position remains vacant, and then, another process will follow to try and fill that vacancy. What I mean here by no sooner than the 19th of April is that should voting, the voting is scheduled to go from the 4th till the 8th of April. If we do have positions that go to a vote, what we do is that we publish on the day that voting closes something that we call the provisional result. And then there is like a week period where, people have the opportunity where if they think that there was major misconduct in the way that maladministration, I should say, not misconduct, if there was maladministration in the way that the election was run, or that they think that the candidates shouldn't have been elected, for a good reason, not just because they didn't like them. Like, it's very rare that this happens, but there is a period where the election can be reviewed and overturned. This is all part of the, what I would describe as a good governance process to make sure that we do have elections that are run according to our regulations, and these are all things in our regulations that are required. So that provisional result gets posted, and then there are 5 business days, and then that becomes the final result or the official result. Because there's so many public holidays in April, though, that 5 business days isn't actually until the 19th of April, even though voting closes on the 8th. So that's what that purposefully vague governance language means, if you were wondering. But basically, yeah, if there's a vote, you'll know whether you're, officially on the board by the 19th of April. If you are uncontested, that's fine. It all happens a little bit sooner. That said, if you're uncontested and a position does go to a vote, it does mean as well that you're still not official until that final date, because it's all just part of the same process. But I wouldn't worry too much about that now. It's something that, you'll get communicated to you further down the line if we are actually in that position. But it also does mean that we do require a police check of all board members. If you've read the election notice already, you will have seen that there is a bit of eligibility requirement relating to not having any convictions recorded against you, because that is part of not only the legislation relating to non-for-profit organisation board membership, but also the USASA Constitution. So to ensure that you're not ineligible on those grounds, we do require that you supply a police check, but we will reimburse you for the cost of that. With that in mind, I wouldn't recommend that anyone go, unless you've got a very recent police check already, that's fine, but I wouldn't recommend that anyone go out and get one prior to being communicated with by me that you are the board member and will need to get that police check, just because obviously we don't want you to incur any expenses unnecessarily, because we can't reimburse people getting police checks who weren't told to get one, basically, as well. So yeah, I also will flag that the nomination for next year's board will open in September and voting will occur in October. We have the election at that period because the later you have it in the year, people have exams, people are busy. So we try and get that done beforehand. But it does mean that if you're elected and you don't know that you're on the board officially until, say, the end of April, and then September comes around, you're going to feel like it's been a blink of an eye and already we're recruiting the next person, but your term still goes till the end of December. So I'll just flag that with you now, because I have had some people start from by-elections before and then have that bit of shock where they feel like it's already the end, but no, you definitely have until the end of the year. Does anyone have any questions about that time commitment stuff? All right, cool. So I mentioned before that there are some strict requirements about board meeting attendance. And this is because, as I've said, it is the bare minimum of what's considered satisfactory board member performance, I suppose, if you want to think about it that way. There is actually a provision in the USASA Constitution that I've got up on the screen here that says that your position will become vacant if you miss 2 consecutive meetings or 3 out of 5 consecutive meetings without being excused by ordinary resolution of the board. So what that means is that if you miss 2 meetings in a row and the board hasn't granted you official leave, your position will automatically become vacated and you won't be on the board anymore. The board doesn't, other than approving leave, the board has no discretion to undo this because it's what's in the Constitution. And I don't put this here to scare you. I guess I just put this here to make it really clear that there are attendance requirements. If you can't attend, you can apply for leave and the board will judge that on its merits of the individual application. But that, I guess, that there is kind of a serious commitment involved in some of this as well. So do consider that. Hang on, I've got a message in the chat. Yeah, so thanks, Michelle. I was about to bring that up. So board meetings take place on the 3rd Tuesday of every month at 6 p.m. So I think for next month, for example, that is the 15th of March. I'm not sure off the top of my head what the April date is, but yeah, if you look at your diaries and you see the 3rd Tuesday of every month, that's when the board meeting will be. Yeah. You can also attend these meetings via Zoom if you can't make it in person. And this is what I'm getting to here as well. So how long do meetings usually go for? Anywhere between 1 hour and, no, anywhere between like 30 minutes to an hour and a half, I would say. They are quite efficient. The chair, who's president this year, runs quite an efficient meeting. But we do, of course, send out board papers in advance. Like, you'll get all the papers and all the documents the week before the board meeting. So you'll give yourself plenty of time to be able to be prepared for that meeting, and that's what makes them short, essentially. But there is quite a culture of people reading those meetings, reading those papers, coming to the meetings prepared, so that, you can be ready to make those decisions and have the discussion that's needed, but not for it to drag on forever. So I do have a slide here about travel, and I suppose I direct this mostly to the people who might be interested in one of the regional campus positions. And that is that if you did want to attend a board meeting in person, that is something that can be organised. And in fact, there's quite a lot of value in attending in person. I think you'll get to connect more with the people that you're working with. You'll get the opportunity to see, USASA head office and how things are on the ground and meet all the staff and so on. So there is a lot of value in that. But of course, if you do have personal commitments that require you not to be, or that, don't allow you to travel, that is fine as well. You are going to be able to attend those board meetings via Zoom. So yeah, we do try and make it work for you, essentially. We've actually got a board member this year who is based in Sydney. So, it's not just the regional reps that might need to travel for board meetings. It is getting a bit more common, and I suppose especially in this digital, Zoom normal age that we're in now, it's a lot more of the norm to do things this way. So yeah, I don't want people to think that they have to come to Adelaide for the board meeting, but I also want to let you know that you can if you need to, and there is value in that. And we will cover your accommodation for one night after the board meeting, and we will cover your flights and your transfers to and from the airport. Any other incidentals such as meals or anything else like that, or any additional nights of accommodation that you might want to do, would be at your own expense. However, board members do receive a monthly honorarium of $250, which is supposed to cover any kind of costs incurred in being a board member. And that's like an unconditional $250 per month as well. And it's basically a stipend that's not attached to any kind of performance or whatever. We just, obviously have that trust relationship that if you're on the board and collecting the honorarium, it's because you're being an active board member. But yes, it is unconditional, and you will be able to use that to supplement any kind of travel and expenses that you do have to do. Cool. So I guess I've talked a little bit about, that we do have strict meeting schedules, that there is a bit of commitment, that there's quite a lot of things to do, but it is worth it. And, you will get a lot out of this. You'll get to work in a diverse team of people. And when I say diverse, I don't just mean, culturally diverse. I mean people from diverse backgrounds, diverse ages, diverse work experiences, diverse opinions, just even down to that, UniSA has 6 campuses, 7 if we count UniSA online. There's diversity in that itself, and the experience of a student at Mawson Lakes campus is going to be very different to an experience of a student at McGill, and they're only like 10 Ks down the road from each other. So, there's a lot of different views and perspectives that you'll get from working in this. It is also really personally rewarding, and I say that in that there's nothing more satisfying, I suppose, than seeing a project that you've been working on or a policy that you've been working on to influence actually come into fruition, and you see the changes that it makes in people's lives. Being a board member and any kind of volunteering or any kind of this, if you've ever experienced this kind of thing before, then you know that already. You know how rewarding it can be. But of course, as well, we do want to make sure that you have that ongoing support, training and coaching. And that's partly why we have my role and my team to, help support you and make sure that you are equipped to do your role well and that you are supported in doing it. The next one I've got on here is developing your enterprise skills. And so what I mean by that is those kind of skills that used to be referred to as like soft skills, things like writing, drafting emails, professional practice, all of those things that I think as you move further in your professional career, you kind of take for granted, but you forget that there really is that transitional period when you're leaving university and towards entering the workforce, where you kind of that's when you're developing all these things. And I guess being on the board is one of those ways to be able to do that. You're going to learn how to, manage your time to do professional activities and attend meetings, while also then going on pub crawls and doing all those things, like, balancing that university life of being a student with being a professional, and I suppose, developing all of those things. There are also, exclusive leadership opportunities, and I did mention some of these already. So, for example, those hiring panels that you might be a part of, or any of these other kind of working groups, or so on. Even that being on academic board, as I mentioned, like, there are 5 students that are on academic board, but they're all on the USASA board. So, it does open a doorway, I suppose, to have that influence throughout the university, and increase your scope and influence on the way that things are run for students here. And at the bottom, I've also put here experience in areas wanted by employers, because it's so true. Like, this role is very transferable. Going back to what those enterprise skills are, some of them include, like, attending meetings, organising committees, being on working groups, all of those kinds of things. The fact that you've done that and you've got that experience, you'll get the confidence, and the confidence that you get from doing that is definitely going to help you in your future career as well. So, yeah, I as much as I want people to be aware of, like, yes, this is a serious role. Yes, there are things you get to do, and that you will need to, put that work in. It is worth it, and you will get a lot of benefits from doing it as well. So now that we're through all of that stuff, let's talk about the actual election process itself and how to actually get yourself elected. So, as I've mentioned, the basic eligibility for this election and its vacancies are that you are from the home campus for that vacancy, and that means having a McGill, a Wales, or a Mount Gambier home campus. Now, your home campus is attached to the program that you're enrolled in. So, if you're not sure what your home campus is, you should check with Campus Central just to be sure, because it is based on your program. Because, for example, second year pharmacy students, they do most of their courses at City West, but their home campus is City East, because the pharmacy home campus is City East. So, I think you'll probably know which is your home campus, but I just thought I'd put that out there just to check that you're aware of that, because there also have been times where students have nominated, and then I've had to, then at the end, when we do check their eligibility, I unfortunately have to give them the bad news and knock them back that no, sorry, they weren't actually from the campus that they thought they were, from that real, governance side of things, which is, as a governance organisation, basically what we follow and what is our everyday ruler is the Constitution and the governance of the USASA. So you must also be an onshore student. So what this means is that you are physically located in Australia. This isn't as much of an issue probably for most people these days. This was an issue last year when a lot of international students, for example, weren't able to get into the country. So even though they were UniSA students and they were studying and they were doing their courses, because they weren't physically located in Australia, they were ineligible to run on the board. So again, not much of an issue now, and I think, if you're in Australia, then that's great, and international students are able to come here now anyway. But yeah, just another thing that I need to mention, because it is part of the requirements. The next one is never having been involuntarily removed or vacated from the board. So basically what that means is you can't have been kicked off the board before. If you've never been on the board, then cool, you know that definitely doesn't apply to you. But I suppose an example of this would be if you'd been on the board before and you missed 2 meetings in a row and you were vacated using that act of the Constitution, that's considered involuntarily vacated. So that would make you ineligible to run again. You also can't be a permanent or fixed term contract employee of USASA or UniSA. With this one, if you're a casual employee of UniSA, that's fine. If you do have like a part-time contract or something that you're not sure whether it's considered fixed term or whatever, that's fine. I'm happy for you to touch base with me one-on-one, and we can look into the circumstances of that to see whether you're eligible or not. But yeah, basically that's one of the other global requirements for all board members. Again, have never been convicted of an indictable offence or an offence related to fraud and dishonesty. So that's what we're checking when we get the police check. And also this last one, which I find quite amusing, because what does this even mean? But But you also, to be eligible, you must agree to comply with the directions from the Commissioner in connection with any application for a liquor licence in SA. And I'm pretty sure that this is in the Constitution because back in the day, USASA used to run a pub, used to run a bar on campus. We no longer run a bar on campus, but that's still in our Constitution. So I guess if you agree to go, yes, I will comply with the directions, Commissioner, well, then that's fine. But we do get you guys to sign a declaration at the time that you submit your nomination statement. So you will get to read all of these eligibility requirements again. Now, the election is run by, the administration of the election is overseen by two people called returning officers. So we have what we call a returning officer and then what we have as an assistant returning officer. Now, I am the assistant returning officer for this election. And you can see here as well that I've got Deb Arnold is the returning officer. So Deb is a person who is external to USASA. She she works for her own business called Third Sector Management, but Deb has a lot of experience in running our elections and has been returning officer with me for the last 5 years on these elections. So she definitely understands what we do, but she is external, and the benefit of her being external is that she can make those decisions. She can apply the regulations, and, you know, there's no way that she can be kind of, I suppose, have any kind of bias or perception of bias on the outcomes of those decisions. So, for example, Deb would be the person who decides if someone makes a complaint against another candidate, Deb would be the person who, in that first instance, decides what outcome there should be for them. Now, there's a good reason that I'm not the returning officer and that I'm the assistant returning officer, and that is simply that I work with the board every day, all day. So I work with the board before you're elected, I work with the board during the term you're elected, and I work with the board after the fact when we start doing those handover things. So it is really good to have that sense of distance and to be able to maintain, I suppose, that, you know, the different roles and those different purposes. Of course, though, you are going to hear a lot from me because I coordinate the administration of the election on behalf of the returning officer. So basically, Deb makes the decisions and I do the busy work, if you want to think about it like that. So I didn't put her email address on there, but I'm happy to email that out with the slides, but it is also in the election notice. So if you did need to get in contact with Deb for any particular reason, perhaps on a matter of, you know, interpreting something in the election regulations, if you're not quite sure, that falls with Deb, that decision of what that means. So get in contact with her that way. But yeah, I will email out the slides of this presentation, and I will include Deb's email address in that email as well. So nominations open on Monday at, sorry. Can you still hear me? Yeah, so nominations opened at 9 o'clock on Monday, and they will remain open until 4 p.m. on Friday next week. So we've got a 2-week nomination period. So you've still got a little bit of time to decide whether this position is, you know, right for you, something that you want to go for. And I guess plenty of time as well to get that nomination form in. I will say I recommend having a look at the nomination form at least, you know, at least a day or two before nominations closed, particularly if you're a leave things for the last minute person. And that's essentially because, you know, if there's something on that form that you're not quite sure about, you want to make sure that you give yourself enough time to be able to get it in by that deadline, because that is a very firm deadline. And unless there are extraordinary circumstances, it's probably very unlikely that, you know, that we would work around that deadline, because we want to make it as fair for everyone. And that means that we try and have the same rules for everyone. I'll suggest that you read the election notice. It does have that, you know, the instructions on how to nominate, but essentially, you know, fill out the form during that period of time, taking note that on that form you will need to select a candidate briefing that you're going to go to. So that is something that is compulsory for all candidates to attend. It goes for maybe 45 minutes. I think I've written an hour on the nomination form, but it never usually goes for that long. And in fact, I think for this election, it might be a bit quicker because we've covered a lot of this information now. But basically, we go through the actual ins and outs of the regulations that you need to know, and most importantly, the stuff around campaigning and around your nomination statement. So yeah, those are the dates there. So you can see their policy statement upload deadline. That's something that we usually point out during those candidate briefings, but I guess I can flag that with you now. that essentially you just need to upload a photograph and a 250-word statement, and then that gets published on the, on the system. So when people then go to cast their vote, they can see who the candidates are and a short statement about them. That is the bare minimum of campaigning that you are required to do. If you want to just put your name out there and don't want to campaign, then that's absolutely fine. But campaigning is something that people sometimes do for elections. It's always a bit interesting with by-elections because you never really know, I suppose, how intense that it's going to be. For those big elections, when you've got 15 positions going at once, you'll know there's an election on campus because you'll see people handing out flyers and doing all of this and putting up posters and stuff. You are still more than welcome to do that during this period, but we'll go into a little bit of more detail about that when we go to the candidate briefings, not next week, but the week after. So yeah, you pick one of those sessions. You don't have to come to both. And if you definitely cannot attend either of those, then there is a little spot on the nomination form when you can select, I would like to arrange an alternative. And then in that case, when I see your nomination form come in, I will respond to you an email to say, all right, when would you like to have one like, and then give you that opportunity, I suppose, to apply for a more convenient time. We do tend to try and have the sessions, all at the same time, because obviously every additional one we have to run is an extra 45 minutes of workload that obviously we already have other things, we already have other things in our roles. But that said, I think for an election of this size, it should be fine. And just, try and attend one of those preset ones. But if you can't, well then, just touch base with us and we'll see what we can do. I will very quickly go back to the previous slide because I didn't mention that your provisional eligibility would be checked before voting begins. And that's essentially, as I mentioned before, we check your home campus to make sure that you are from the campus that you have nominated for and all of those kinds of things. So we do try and, make sure that you, one, are an actively enrolled student and also that you are from that campus. That's basically what we check. I suppose, for those bigger elections, for some more context, someone's running the international student rep. At that time, we also check that they are an international student and stuff like that. But these elections are for McGill rep, not McGill undergraduate rep. So that means as well that you can be either a postgrad or undergraduate student from McGill and run for that position. The undergrad position is filled, but this one is open to both. And with the Whyalla and the Mount Gambier ones, I actually don't think there are any postgraduate courses which have a home campus for either of those degrees, which is why I didn't mention postgrads. But yeah, just something as well to be aware of, that it is open to both postgrad and undergrad. So when it does get to the time when voting occurs, and this is of course, on the assumption that we have received more than one nomination for the vacant position, voting will open at 9 a.m. on Monday, the 4th of April. So every student who is eligible to vote in the election will receive a link. We use a company called Big Pulse that does our elections. And if you've ever been a UniSA student during any of our elections before, then you would be well aware of this because they do send out that link, that email to all students. It's got a link to your ballot form. And then that's where you can go and cast your vote. So we do have online voting that everyone can do from their own personal devices. As I've said, eligible students will be emailed the link, and that means that McGill students will open, they'll get the link and they'll open it, and it will only show them the ballot form for the McGill campus, and vice versa for Whyalla and Mount Gambier. It also means that students from Mawson Lakes or City West, they won't get any emails. This election doesn't, involve them. Their positions were filled at the end of year elections last year. So it's a bit more low key this year, but that's good. It means we can spend more time trying to, promote and support you guys in being candidates. The way that the people can cast their votes is with optional preferential. And so what that means is that they can rank all of the candidates either, 1, 2, 3, 4, or however, or they can just go 1, 2, or 1, no matter how many, because it's optional preferential, they can preference as many or as few with a minimum of 1 vote given. So, that's another way to think about it as well. If you're a real election head or really into that kind of thing, or, the way that votes occur, then that might be something that you think about, particularly if there are other candidates running. But of course, you know, you don't need to worry about it on that level either if you don't want to. There's no requirement that you're an expert on voting systems. I just personally find it really interesting of how these run. So I like to share that with you guys, because if I was a candidate, I would want to know how the votes were cast and how the votes were counted. And the votes are counted using a single transferable vote, which again means that those preferences do matter. Those preferences can change the outcome of the election. And that that they do, you know, you don't waste your vote voting for someone. Although you're not really wasting your vote anyway, but yeah, I guess we've all got politics in the brain at the moment because we do have a state election coming up. But yeah, and then as I've mentioned before as well, that provisional result will be announced at 5 p.m. on Friday, the 8th of April. And we post the outcome of the election on our social media channels and on our website, and then we also email the candidates directly. So yeah, you'll receive the information at the same amount of time. So yeah, so that's essentially the election process and what it is to be, you know, what it means to be part of USASA and part of the board. Now, I've just got one person in the Zoom at the moment. Michelle, did you have any questions? If you'd prefer, I'm happy to, you know, for us to have a chat afterwards. If you don't want any questions on the recording, that's fine. Or even if you're just happy to, yeah, whatever you'd like to do. All right, beautiful. So with that in mind, I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you so much to Michelle for attending, and thank you to those people who are watching this on Zoom. Oh, sorry, watching the recording of this. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your interest in the election. Best of luck. If you do need to get in contact with me, you have my email address that I sent out the Zoom link to this in. So feel free to send me an email if you'd like. And for those who are watching this and don't have my email address, it's bridget.laffey@USASA.edu.au, and you can also find it in the election notice with Deb's email address as well. So thank you very much. Have a lovely night and good luck.